Devoted Dreamers. This is episode 94. I'm your host, Merritt Onsa, and this is going to be a little bit of a unique twist from what maybe you expected. This is the tail end of season 4, and I'll confess a little something to you right here. I had hoped to have one last interview for you before the end of season 4, before I'm fully on maternity leave for the entire summer. And it just didn't work out. I had great plans, but I ran out of time. That's the reality. And so I thought that instead of just leaving you hanging or falling off the face of the earth and nobody knows what's happened, I thought I'd do a quick little what I have learned in the last 2 years of podcasting episode. So it's just going to be me today. And if you have been following along on Instagram, you maybe have seen that June 1st was the 2-year anniversary of my whole podcasting endeavor. And that was really fun. It kind of snuck up on me a little bit because I got this baby brewing right here, and that seems to be the highest priority on my mind right now. But did have a small little gathering at a local venue just to be with those of you who were able to make it and see one another face to face and just celebrate. So that was really fun. We did that on Saturday, June 2nd. And some people asked me some great questions in the midst of just kind of hanging out, having kombucha together. So in a small way, that's inspired a little bit of what I wanted to talk about on today's episode. So again, I'm calling this What I've Learned in 2 Years of Podcasting. And I've got some takeaways for you at the end that I hope you'll be able to use as you think about pursuing your own God-shaped dream. So let's jump into it. I've got a whole list of pros and one con, so I'll fit that con in there somewhere. But the number one, this is not in order of priority, of course, but the first thing that came to mind as I thought about this was that being consistent, so for me that meant publishing an episode every week, has made all the difference in following this dream. So the reason that that's such a big deal, and I've heard a ton of people talk about consistency is key, but I'm realizing that what it means to me is that this is not just a hobby. It's not just something that I feel like doing and do when I feel like doing it. It's something that I have committed to do every week. And so you as the listener come to expect that, hey, unless I tell you differently, there's going to be an episode on Wednesday. It also makes it real to guests, or I've had lots of PR and promotional companies, mostly people who are helping promote women who have written books. Tons of people reach out to me hey, can you have this person on your show? It just builds some respect because I'm not just doing this on a whim or just whenever I feel like it. I'm consistent and have a process, and it forces me to use my time wisely. So, setting up systems so that I can accomplish that every week goal. So that's been really helpful and important to me. And yeah, I think about it. This is episode 94. How in the world did I get to 94 episodes? And it's because I made a plan and followed that plan. And, and honestly, there was a little bit of pressure that it put on myself that, oh, hey, if I am still in a season that's live and I don't have an interview set up for, the next couple weeks, I need to step on it and get something set up. So number one, consistency is key. Number two, with regard to stepping out and doing something bold despite your fear. This is probably, I think, one of the biggest things. And as I hear from some of you when you come in and join the Facebook group, I ask this question of what do you feel like is standing in the way, or what is your biggest struggle as you seek to follow your God-shaped dream? Fear is seriously one of the most common answers, and people communicate it differently, what that fear is about. I would actually love to know more specifically what you actually fear. I think for me it was trying something and failing. I've had several blogs in my life, and they all kind of feel like a flop because I maybe didn't have goals around them, or they didn't have consistency. And I think I was afraid to put my voice for real out into the world. And so this has forced me to do that. But what I've learned about this stepping out despite the fear and talking to 93 women is that even the most confident looking and the most successful from like a worldly standpoint, they also struggle with things like fear and doubt and insecurity. And it doesn't, at least from the perspective of when I'm talking to them, it hasn't kept them from moving forward anyway. So, the interesting thing about that is, number one, it helps me to feel not so alone, that this is like a common thing that we struggle with, that if you are called to do something bold, you are probably going to feel fearful about it. But the women who've been on the show, who've written the books, who've started the nonprofit, they did it anyway. They stepped out, and I even remember one guest talking about, I wish I could remember who it was, but one guest talking about how she kind of wrote down, it was the purse lady, Rebecca Scott, and she was episode 69. But she said she did kind of like an inventory, like what's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario. And she plays all that out. So, okay, so the worst case scenario happens. Then what? Then what would I do? And she played those things out in her mind and on paper. And it helped her continue to take the step forward in that, she kind of had imagined the most horrible thing that could happen, which was very likely not going to happen, and then had a game plan for how to handle it if it did, which I thought was really helpful. And then number C, I guess I'm numbering things really randomly, but about stepping forward to do something bold in spite of fear, that it strengthens something in you so that you can do that again and take a bigger risk next time. And I really feel like that's something that God's kind of like worked into the system here, that especially if you know him and draw near to him in the midst of figuring out your dream and stepping forward in your dream. But the reality is he is with us. He is faithful. He's not turned his eyes from you in any way ever. And he knows the fear. He's totally aware of the fear. And so as you, in boldness and in trust with him, walking with the Lord, as you step forward and do something that you're like, this was crazy. I can't even believe I'm doing this. He gives you a little bit of extra oomph, like because you've done it, you've taken that step, you've walked with him in it, you've trusted him in it. And all of a sudden at the end, after you've taken that step, you're like, hey, that wasn't half as bad as I thought. And oh, by the way, God was with me and he can be trusted. And so it just builds a little bit, at least for me, it built my faith and it built my trust in him. Here's my one con. I'll just throw it in. So this is the number 3 thing I've learned in 2 years of podcasting, that the cost is higher than I expected in order to do this well. And that means a couple of things. So financially, it's certainly a commitment financially. Time. I talked to Hunter Belis a couple weeks ago, and she probably, I think we were not recording at that point, but she said something about, she thought podcasting was going to take 5 hours a week, and it really takes 20. And it's like, yeah. It takes way more time, especially if you try to do it all yourself. And, it depends on what your dream is. But I specifically decided at the very beginning, like I didn't have the capacity to teach myself editing. And I knew that if I recorded interviews and episodes and left it for a rainy day, like when am I going to do the editing, that I would never be able to be consistent. And so I hired an editor. And that's, a small piece of where that financial cost comes in. But it was so worth my time to do that. And I am kind of teaching myself to edit now. In fact, I'm hoping that I will edit this episode, mainly just because I'm running short on time. Who knows when the baby's going to come. But yeah, you've got to weigh all the costs as you're thinking about pursuing your dream. And then just like the emotional and mental costs, like, it's challenging to day after day continue to do something in faith that you feel like God's called you to do. And just the having my mind in the right place when I'm ready to make a call, or being sick over the winter and practically losing my voice, not being able to interview people, or not being able to interview them with the voice that I am used to. Or even being pregnant, just the oxygen deprivation that I feel in my body. I don't know if you've noticed, but it has been those kinds of things. It's like it messes with you. You have to think through like, oh my gosh, I'm wrestling with all this like internal and external stuff that I've got to deal with. And I'm kind of this way. Like I think I tend to be optimistic about the things that are things that I want to do. Like, oh, it won't be that bad. And it hasn't been that bad, but there's certainly a cost. There's a cost to my family. Like my husband's got my daughter out running errands so that I can record this episode today. And it's just a lot of stuff that I didn't know or didn't think about before I started podcasting. Okay, so that was number 3. And I've got 2 more for you. So that's 5. I can do the math. So here's number 4, that just because I can't or won't do this perfectly, it doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. So if you've ever heard Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hour rule, I can't remember which book of his that was, but I'll try to look it up and put it in the show notes. But it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become world class. So I don't really have the capacity to do that math, but if you think about, like, if you work at a job and you do that 8 hours a day, 40 hours is 1 week. I would have to pull out a calculator to tell you what a year was, but it is a considerable amount of time to get good at something. And even if you're talking about like your full-time job, you're not focused on one particular effort the entire 8 hours of the day. So think about it in the context of learning to play the piano or some other skill that you are starting from scratch with. And that's how I was with podcasting. And I am far, far, far from 10,000 hours. So I do not have a world-class podcast, but the reality is that nobody is perfect all the time. So if it takes you 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become world class, somewhere between hour 1 and hour 999, you're going to suck at it. You're not going to be good. You're certainly not going to be perfect. And so we all had to start somewhere with whatever it is. And if you have this perspective of, I can't do it unless it's going to be perfect, it's going to keep you from following your dream. So for me, the love of podcasting, the love of just like the reward of getting to do this, getting to speak with amazing women who are women of faith, who've stepped out in spite of their own fear and who have seen God really use their gifts and talents for his glory and his kingdom. It's a beautiful thing to hear those stories. It's so fun to hear from you, listeners. The Facebook group is one place that happens, but I also hear from folks on Instagram or people who send me direct messages just saying just how much the shows encourage them. And those are the things that keep me stepping forward even in imperfection. And it's also quite humbling. Like I know I can't do it perfectly, but seeing my imperfections in recorded, they're not pixels, whatever they are, recorded audio files, like those things are posted for, and as long as I continue to pay hosting, those things are posted for life, And I have not gone back and listened to one of my earlier episodes, but I can assure you that there was a lot of stuff I would now say, I think I could do that better. So it's humbling to see myself more honestly and to know that really the reality is it's not my job to be perfect. That's God's job. So that's really important. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. You've maybe heard me say that. And the definition of that I don't really have perfectly either, but it's the good person or the perfectionist. And so this is a huge struggle for me to let things go out into the world that are less than perfect. But it is a great practice for me to do that. And the other reality is that if you expected me to be perfect, you probably wouldn't be listening to this show. And so we're kind of in the same boat, so to speak, that we're all just doing our best. And what more can we ask? So that was lesson number 4, that just because I can't or won't do it perfectly doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. And then number 5, that when I am walking in step with the Lord and attempting even the scary stuff, especially the scary stuff that he has called me to, it draws me closer to the heart of God. I feel like I have greater reminders of his love for me being in kind of this more vulnerable position. It also helps me to see him more for who he is as a kind, loving, and attentive father. And I think, this part depends on just who you are and how you maybe grew up and how you were introduced to the God of the universe. I think for a long time, I felt like God was really distant and separate from me. I didn't have a real sense of his love for me. And so that has been the thing in growing my faith that's been so important, is to be like, yeah, he's a kind, loving, and attentive father. And I feel like following my dream has helped me see more of that part of his character. And the other thing that's really surprising, well, not surprising, but unexpected, is that starting this podcast has opened up doors to other opportunities that I really didn't expect or anticipate. And it's not like a oh God, if I do this for you, then you'll do something for me. It's not that at all. It's that I feel like I'm on a beautiful adventure with him, and he surprises me regularly. And the alternative in my, as I mentioned, kind of perfectionistic bent is that I'd kind of like to script out every detail so I feel better about the parts that feel scary. But that's A, probably not possible, and B, I would miss out on really being open and available to the things that God has for me in this. And I'll use the example of the retreat that I held last November, which a year ago, so summer of 2017, it was just the beginning of dreaming and thinking about this. And it was something I'd always wanted to do, was to host a retreat for women. And I felt like God was kind of, a lot of times just laying in bed at night, just kind of feeding me inspiration for what this could look like and who I might ask to come speak. And, I had this selection of women who had already spoken on the podcast. And there were a few that I just was like, I've got to ask her, because I think, bringing women together to hear face to face, the expertise that this particular person has, I just think it would change us. It would impact our hearts for the Lord. And I had this deep, deep desire that women would come together and know their value and worth in Christ. And so I took steps forward. I went and visited a retreat center, brought a friend along, brought my 3-year-old, well, she was 2 at the time, and just kept taking steps forward to formulate a retreat that 30 people could attend in the fall. So that happened in November. I was sick the entire weekend. I totally lost my voice, which has maybe happened to me once in my whole life. And God did some amazing things despite me. Like, I handled a bunch of logistics, and I prepared to speak and MC the event, and, got people to donate things for giveaways. But God really showed up, and it made that retreat so much more rewarding and fulfilling and encouraging than anything I could have ever planned for. And so that was the beautiful surprise, one of the opportunities that I feel like has come my way by saying, yes, God, I will step out into my dream. And I've written, with the help of some other folks, but I've written a little bit of a mission statement for my ministry. It's even scary to call it that, but it is what it is. And I wanted to share that with y'all. It says, I want to see God's love set women free from the bondage of guilt, shame, and comparison, and empowered to live and love as God made them. And I think fear is kind of part of that bondage of guilt, shame, and comparison as well. And so I didn't have that mission statement 2 years ago when I started the podcast. It was just something that was in my heart that I felt compelled to walk forward in. And so, on May 31st of 2016, I had no idea what June 1st of 2018 was going to look like. But taking those steps forward and being on the adventure with God has been so encouraging and so fulfilling, and I wouldn't take it back for anything. Oh, wait, I do have a number 6. And this one's short, but not nothing. So number 6, the relationships I've made and strengthened as a result of the show. So I've met or, spoken to, interviewed 93 incredible women as guests. I've spoken to, connected to online with you listeners, which has been really, really fun hearing about where you are in your process of considering your God-shaped dream. And then I feel like it's also grown relationships with my face-to-face friendships where, because I have shared that this is a passion of mine, like, people ask me about it, and we get to have conversations that go a little bit deeper than maybe they would have had I not stepped out and shared, like, hey, this is something I really care about. So my takeaways for you, this is kind of in the summary a little bit, but 6 takeaways. Number 1, to listen to God. Who did he make you to be, and what passions has he already written into your story? Number 2, take a step, whatever it is. Big, small. I like to call them baby steps, because I think that's the best place to start, is with something that feels doable, so that you can get a win, so that you feel empowered and encouraged to take the next step. Number 3, figure out what consistency looks like for you and your dream. So whatever it is, your dream's not going to be the same as mine. So consistency might just look like, hey, if I want to write a book, then I'm going to write for 1 hour a day, period. Like whatever that is, so that at the end of a year or at the end of a month, you can say, hey, I've invested this in the dream. And then you can look back and see where God's brought you in it. Number 4, count the cost. It is probably more than you expect, and do it anyway. With knowledge. I mean, obviously, be attentive to things like financial costs and, how it's going to impact your family. But if God has put something on your heart and it's not going away, then identify what the cost is going to be. If you're married, talk to your spouse, your family, your kids about it. Engage them in this thing that you're like, I really sense that this is what God's got for my life, and then take a step anyway. Number 5, push the fear to the fences. So walk forward with him and see what God does in spite of it. Or at the very least, don't let fear be the roadblock that holds you back. There might be other really legitimate roadblocks, like for me, I'm having a baby, I hope, in the next 7 days. And so I'm not going to be taking a lot of steps forward in my dream, for a couple of months, I think. And that's okay. But if God's called you to something and asked you to trust him and push the fear aside, or step over the fear, or walk forward in spite of the fear and find a way to engage in the dream that he's given you. And then number 6, bring your people along. Invest your best with those people who care about you, who ask about your dream. Be relationally generous. Like, trust them with the hard things, the hard aspects of stepping forward in your dream. Tell your story and ask to hear theirs. Ask them what they are dreaming about, what they care about. And then seek the good of the kingdom and God's people. Because the reality is, even if your dream is like a huge passion for you, it's really God's dream for you. It's not about you. God's going to use it to shape you and to grow you and to teach you about himself, but it's not really about you. It's about others. It's about the things that he has empowered and equipped you to do as part of his creation that's going to bring him more glory and going to draw people closer to him because they're watching you trust in him. So those are my takeaways. Those are my things that I've learned in 2 years of podcasting. I'm sure there's a ton more, but wanted to keep it rather short today. And just to let you know, over the next few weeks, here's what's going to happen. And this is a lot of work that has already been done over the last several months, but I do have some episodes, some different unique bonus episodes for you over the summer, and want to share kind of some highlights of what that's going to be all about. So next week, June 13th, there's not going to be an episode. Go listen to some other podcast you love, or go catch up on an episode of Devoted Dreamers that you haven't yet heard. And then for the last 2 weeks of June, I've got a couple of what I'm calling mini-sodes, little mini episodes. They're just about 15 minutes each. I intended to have a bunch of these, but 2 is where I'm at right now, and that's probably as good as it's going to get. But the first one is on baby steps. So if you want to know more about that topic, that is June 20th. And the second one is on letting your dream life out. And this is actually a conversation I had with a friend, Heather Conklin, who is from the Practical Minimalists podcast. So look forward to those at the end of June. And then in July, I'm not publishing anything on July 4th, so go enjoy Independence Day. And then for the rest of the month, and this is really fun, you've maybe heard me talking on the show, this was several months ago, but about doing on-air coaching calls with a listener. So we had a listener volunteer, her name is Lois Martin, to go through like a 3-session process of coaching with Cynthia Culver, who was a guest on the show back in episode 37. And she's a good friend of mine from Dallas, Cynthia is. And we picked Lois to kind of be our guinea pig for this thing that we decided we just wanted to try. And we did 3 sessions. Cynthia and Lois had several conversations outside of the recorded sessions, but we've got 3 episodes for you of Lois's process of coaching with Cynthia, and specifically trying to identify what it is that was standing in the way of pursuing her God-shaped dream, and then how to deal with the thoughts that I think the enemy uses to keep us from stepping forward. So this is a really fun series. Again, that starts the second week in July and runs through the rest of the month. There will be a homework piece where you can come download a little exercise that you can go through the process that Lois went through with Cynthia on your own. So look forward to that. And then the month of August, I'm totally taking off. I'm totally taking off the whole summer, but I've got nothing ready for publish for the month of August. And I think I'm probably going to leave it that way. I know it's a really crazy month as people start to think about back to school and just the fall and everything getting a little bit more intense in our lives again. And so my expectation is that sometime in mid-September, season 5 will start up again. But I'm also leaving just a little bit of space to listen to the Lord if there's something else that he wants me to do or he wants me to pursue this differently. I'm kind of hoping that that's what June, July, and August will be, in addition to the very important role of bringing a fourth person into our family. So again, right now I am heavy in the nesting phase and ready, really ready for maternity leave. So I'm expecting to enjoy the summer, just enjoying the baby and my family and helping us, figure out what it's like to be a foursome instead of a threesome. And so I just appreciate the grace and the freedom that so many of you have just suggested, like, yes, go take the time. And I desperately, I need it. Our family needs it. And so I'm just going to say I will see you in September, and I sure look forward to that, God willing. And before I go, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you devoted dreamers out there. Thank you for dreaming with me. Thank you for trusting me with your dreams as we talk about them in the Facebook group or elsewhere online. And if you're not in there, feel free. Please come and join us. It's called the Devoted Dreamers Insiders Group on Facebook. And there's just a couple of questions to answer. And then I've got a moderator, a woman stepping in for me, at least for the next 4 to 6 weeks. So she'll welcome you into the group and you can get to know some other listeners and just share wherever you're at in your journey. We would love to hear from you. And then I just want to thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey of pursuing your God-shaped dreams. It is so encouraging to me to know that you listen, to know that you're encouraged, that God is using this show to help you take a step towards your dream. I would love to hear more about that as you have opportunities to share. But that's going to be it for today. I want to thank you so much for joining me and for listening today to this little solo episode. And wherever you are with your God-shaped dreams, may you have the courage to take one step toward their realization today. I'll see you in the fall.